in a debate about actual science, the person in possession of the cutting edge scientific information will present it to the public and then kind of welcome questions and then explain it. But that's not at all what we're watching here. We're watching people push an orthodoxy at increasing volume with increasing hysteria, and with increasingly severe penalties for disagreeing. So what is that?
Global elites used to pretend to care about people, but they're not even pretending anymore. I mean, here they fly their private jets, separate private jets, including for the Prime Minister of Britain, his Foreign Secretary, King Charles, all taking their own private jet at the very moment that they're raising energy prices to historically high levels. And as you just saw there with John Kerry demanding the shutdown of coal plants, which will mean that people will burn wood and dung in China, and they will starve, and they will not have enough to eat, and you'll have riots in the streets. I think that what's so different now is that the elites are just openly and blatantly expressing their hatred of humankind, particularly the hatred of working people, of poor people, people both in the United States, in the so-called flyover states that they hate so much, but also in places like India and China and Africa where people want to live a better life, and that's what coal has traditionally provided. What's so interesting, of course, is that the obvious alternative to coal is natural gas. If you cared about climate change, if this was actually about climate change, you would just produce more natural gas because it produces half the carbon emissions of coal. The United States reduced our carbon emissions by 22% between 2005 and 2020, with 61% of that reduction coming just from switching from coal to natural gas. But John Kerry and other climate activists are against natural gas, and they've been stifling the production of natural gas, clean burning American natural gas, which is the cleanest in the world. So it's so obviously hypocritical, but worse than that, I think it's really anti-human, and that's really what gets at it. It's a religion, it's a cult, like you said, and it really is about being against humankind, against humanity.
Well, there's so many interesting threads here. I mean, one is that the rest of the world is ignoring it, and they pay lip service to it, and they're happy to sign treaties that they ignore or that have carve-outs for their behavior. But it really is an Anglosphere thing. It's a Western religion. It's only the United States, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia who really believe, and Germany maybe, really believe this nonsense. And China and India are like, we've got 1 billion people here. We have to feed them. They don't care.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a financial element here, obviously, too, where the largest donor to the Democratic Party, George Soros, but also Michael Bloomberg, and a whole set of other oligarchs have a strong interest in keeping energy scarce. I think that's what is a big driver of this. Yes. That's why they want to shut down nuclear plants, coal plants. They want to stifle natural gas production, and they want us to use weather-dependent, energy-dilute, primitive sources of energy, so-called renewables that are actually anything other than renewable. And these are technologies that require 300 to 900 times more land than natural gas or nuclear plants, and that keep energy expensive and scarce so that they can control the energy markets around the world. And so it's really all three of these things. It's sort of a grotesque display of anti-human power, of elitist power. It's also a religion. These guys actually think of themselves as saving the planet, but it's just a grift. It's a scam in order to keep energy supplies, energy which should be abundant. I mean, natural gas and nuclear are, basically infinite sources of energy, and trying to keep us scarce and keep energy scarce and dependent so that they can exercise greater control over the population.
Where are the energy companies, the oil and gas companies in this? You would think, since they're famously profitable and big, some of the biggest companies in the world, that they would be making a lot of noise pushing back. They do in subtle ways, but they don't do it in public. Why is that?
Well, they've basically been bullied into submission. And so you've seen the ESG movement has basically convinced the world that natural gas and nuclear are bad, and that, solar panels made by Uyghur Muslims in China and wind turbines, which are threatening to make the North Atlantic right whale extinct in the United States, that those are somehow better for the environment. It's a complete corruption of science, of rationality. Anybody can see that natural gas and nuclear are the superior forms of energy, but the ESG movement has used political activism to put pressure, and also used pension funds to put pressure on the oil and gas industries to basically sell out their main product. I mean, here you have it's actually in many cases cheaper. I mean, natural gas is so abundant in the United States. It should be one of our greatest export commodities. And so they've gotten the pension funds organized through ESG. They've gotten the political actors like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, to campaign against oil and gas, even though it's been the biggest driver of carbon emissions reductions over the last 20 years. And not just in the United States. I mean, people don't know that carbon emissions peaked in Britain and France and Germany in the mid-70s, mostly because of natural gas and nuclear. So I think you've just seen, cowardice set in response to some pretty intense ESG bullying by activist pension funds and by, frankly, sociopathic political leaders like Gavin Newsom.
So, I mean, since this is fundamentally nonsense, the math doesn't work, as they say. Wind farms can't power the New York City subway. They can't fly airplanes. I mean, it's like, actually, if you don't have cheap energy, you don't have advanced civilization. So how long does this kind of posturing go on before it has to end?
I think, Tucker, I think you said it exactly right. I mean, we know that the pillars of civilization are cheap energy, meritocracy, law and order, and free speech. And all four of those pillars are currently under attack. And so you start with cheap energy. I mean, you can't maintain modern civilization without cheap energy. We know we couldn't have had the Industrial Revolution for physical reasons if they hadn't found coal and they hadn't made a use of coal with the steam engine. So the attack on cheap energy is truly an attack on modern civilization, and it should frighten us, and we should be aware to it and alive to it. I think, what gives me hope here is that, environmentalism, it used to have a kind of utopian, positive side. That's all gone. I mean, we saw with Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion, it became very nihilistic. It became very anti-human. So dark, it was basically just about preventing the end of the world, preventing the apocalypse. They used to still try to hide their hatred of humanity a little bit. But this year, I mean, gloves are off and masks are off, and you can just see, here they are openly flying their private planes to a climate conference where they're demanding that ordinary people pay much more for energy, that we keep energy supplies secure. Our electric grids right now in the United States, Tucker, are in serious jeopardy. I mean, we're having reliability crises, not just in California. That's the most famous one, but we've seen it all over the country. Texas. We saw it in the Midwest and Southeast last year during winter. So we're seeing an attack on the grid, which is really a testament to modern civilization. It's happening everywhere at the same time, Europe, United States. What gives me hope is that I think it's finally becoming obvious to people that it's a scam, and that the people that are pushing this really hate civilization, or at least they hate civilization for others. They want it only for themselves, and that they're in the grip of a really dogmatic cult philosophy. I mean, I think it's fair to call it a death cult at this point, when you're stifling energy supplies that are necessary to keep people alive, allow poor people to escape from the use of wood and dung. I don't know what else you call that than an anti-human death cult.
That's right. It's not environmentalism, it's the snarling face of tyranny.
Younger people say the news is full of lies.
In Kennedy's motorcade.
239 people. Cell death of Jeffrey Epstein.